Hello, good morning, welcome. Welcome mostly to, I see Dr. Aoki's capstone. How many of you are in Dr. Aoki's capstone class? For everybody except folks sitting in the back. Well, welcome. I'm so excited to see so many familiar faces, so many graduating seniors. Yes, probably, hopefully. This event is for you folks who are prepared to take the plunge, moving from your time with us as a college student to being in the working world. So before we dive into today's proceedings, I'm Dr. Nick Marks. I'm the Director of Undergraduate Studies for the Department of Communication Studies. I've had many of you in classes before. Those that I haven't, come say hi afterwards. I'll just quickly note that we are in the middle of our Communication Studies week. This is our second day of programming. We'll have another alumni panel later. Tomorrow is our student celebration from 11 to 1 in the LSC Theater, where we hold our ACT Human Rights Film Festival. We'll be showcasing undergraduate research, poster sessions, highlighting some of the great work that y'all have done in your coursework during your time with us here in the Comm Studies Department. The best part is there will be free pizza, free lunch, free pizza for all of you to come, and your roommates, and your housemates, and your parents, and your dog. Don't bring your dog. Maybe bring your dog. Let them sit outside and tell me that you brought your dog, and I'll go say hi. All right? All right, without further ado, I'm excited to welcome our three distinguished alumni here back to campus. I'm going to introduce each of them, provide a couple of guiding questions to get the conversation started, then hand it over to you folks. I really want this time to be for you to ask our recent alumni what their time in the department was like, how the skills they used as a comm studies major are helping them in their careers at the moment. All right, so I'm going to start in the middle with Kale McMonagle. Kale manages civic canopies projects that provide capacity building for individuals, organizations, and coalitions. This includes providing training, facilitation, coaching, and project management for collaborative initiatives across the state. Throughout her work, she ensures alignment with the Canopy's community learning model by championing Canopy's evaluation tools. Kale brings extensive, ample experience in cultivating regional relationships, designing innovative public processes, recruiting diverse stakeholders, and crafting powerful stories about collaboration. Kale received her BA and MA in Communication Studies in the Deliberative Studies specialization from Colorado State University. Please welcome Kale. To Kale's left is Emily Myler, Neighborhood Development Liaison with the City of Fort Collins. Emily is a Colorado native who grew up in the mountain town of Carbondale, but found her home on the Front Range by Colorado State University. She holds an associate's degree in Spanish from Colorado Mountain College, as well as a bachelor's in communication studies and a master's of public policy and administration from CSU. Emily arrived at CSU as a junior, intending to study conflict management, and took the interpersonal and relational communication track in the Comm Studies curriculum. She chose to continue her Spanish education with a minor in linguistics focusing on Spanish. Emily was on the night editing staff for the Rocky Mountain Collegian and was president of the Communication Studies Club while at CSU. She also joined the Center for Public Deliberation and spent 3 semesters as a student associate. It was in this role that Emily realized that she could fuse her knack for conflict management with her desire to make an impact on her community through civic engagement, and shifted towards that track in the department. Now, Emily works with the City of Fort Collins as a public engagement specialist in the Neighborhood Services Department, helping empower members of the community to engage with building and development, which may impact their lives. Please welcome Emily. And on the right is Claudia Perez. Claudia is currently the Public Affairs Manager at Planned Parenthood of the Rocky Mountains. Claudia oversees Colorado's statewide political organizing and advocacy efforts to expand access to reproductive health care. She graduated from CSU in 2020 and currently lives in Denver, Colorado. Please welcome Claudia. Thank you all so much for joining us. So I'll kick us off by just asking you each to describe how your time in the Communication Studies Department prepared you for the job, the role that you currently have. Emily, would you care to get us started?
Yeah, absolutely. My time at CSU as an undergrad in comm studies was definitely transformative for me. As you heard in my bio, I came in with a little bit of a different idea of what I wanted to do than when I left, and I think probably a lot of you have experienced that in college, and that's the most exciting thing about going to college, is getting to figure out what exactly makes you passionate, what gets you up in the morning. I think when I look back out in my coursework, including all of those kind of required classes that you have to take for comm studies and can sometimes kind of be a pain, and then the things you get to focus in on when you figure out your track, I constantly use my ability to speak in public in my job pretty much every day, and my ability to be comfortable speaking in public, which is not something that everybody just comes out of the womb with, and is something that I'm grateful to have. Plus, in addition, my ability to look at problems with kind of a wicked problem lens, which I picked up at the CPD, and was very, very important for me in my role now when I'm doing a lot of work with complex problem solving. And that is present whether you go into the private sphere or the public sphere of work. You're going to be facing problems that are challenging and that involve a large number of people, and being able to come at it with that lens that I picked up has been really, really important to me.
So when I came to CSU, I joined up with the Communication Studies Department because somebody had told me when I entered college that I needed to look at people I really admired and then go do whatever degree that they did. So I really liked Ira Glass from This American Life, and he got a degree in semiotics. CSU didn't have a degree in semiotics, but communications was about the closest thing to it. And what I appreciated about both of those was that it was really getting us to think about language and how language is constructed and how we make meaning out of our world based on the language that we use. I, during my time at CSU, worked for the KCSU, and I also, through the public speaking course, did the service learning component of that, and worked at KRFC2, the community radio station. And both of those experiences gave me good experience in journalism in a degree where I wasn't sure I was ready to commit to journalism full on. And communications allowed me to kind of explore that in different ways. And it helped me gain the experience then finding the Center for Public Deliberation. Ended up, similar to you, kind of figuring out your different passions throughout the time at CSU. It turns out that I'm a much better facilitator than I am a journalist. I went and worked for a small NPR station in North Carolina following my time at CSU, and realized I'm just way too introverted to be a journalist full time. But a lot of the things that I was working on in that realm, asking good questions, getting to hear from community, learning how to talk to people, were all things that translated into my experience with the Center for Public Deliberation and facilitation. Similarly, even though I specialized in public deliberation in my master's then and focused, I still pull from all of the different areas of comm studies, in the sense that, I mean, just the other day I was writing about Aspasia from Rhetoric and Western Thought, although I think you all call that class something different now.
History and Theory of Rhetoric, yep.
History and Theory of Rhetoric, yeah. And so all of that comes into my daily work just because work requires communicating, and so I pull from all of the different disciplines in my daily experience.
So I will start by saying that I absolutely loved being a communication studies student, especially at CSU. And when I was here, I started working at a local nonprofit mental health center that provided mental health services, both traditional and non-traditional, to the Spanish-speaking Latine immigrant communities in northern Colorado. And that's really where I started looking at public health and specifically advocacy to start that off in my senior year, right? And then was able to then look at different opportunities in the Denver area, right? Again, still related to political advocacy, but now working in pursuit of like sexual reproductive health care. And when I was, doing the job search and like assessing my skills and being able to like talk about that in front of the interview panels, I really appreciated having the skills that a communications student gains, right, through this coursework. And you might think, right, like how does somebody get into political organizing, right, and doing legislative work, elective work from like a communication degree, and the two are incredibly compatible, and I found mostly because of the ability to work with groups, right, and to understand how communities respond to information. That is something that I think is a savviness that you learn, right, and that I really got to hone in on as a student in this space. So when you're going into community and trying to meet folks where they're at, it really pays off well to know how to listen first, right? Advocacy, listening is an incredible form of advocacy, right? And being able to meet the community where they're at, and what that means for different demographics as well. So understanding your audience is key to the political sphere, right? And in my position, I work both in this liminal space of grassroots organizing and grass tops organizing, right? So I'm lobbying up the ladder as well as trying to meet people at the grassroots space and community, whether that's with local social organizations, right, volunteers, community members, people who are kind of like moderate and middle ground, and all of those folks have a space in the work that I oversee. And knowing how to like craft a message that's going to have the proper impact, right? Because you need to be able to consider all the factors that are at play, right? Like what is the social zeitgeist that's currently captivating your audience's attention? What is the political environment and weather, right? Like what are conditions that nobody has control over that are important and relevant to the message that you're trying to convey at a given moment? And then also, right, like knowing the nuances between talking to, newly graduated, college educated, young voters, right, as opposed to talking to, lifetime voters who are of a different age demographic in the older, right, like age range. And, I think that I've seen people take those approaches and try to apply, right, like a one size fits all. And as you all know in communications, that's not how we do our work. That's not how we're best successful. And I think that just like the relational organizing and being able to trust myself and my ability to become a trusted messenger, right, has paid off so successfully in the work and mission that I'm trying to accomplish today.
I've got two more questions for folks, and I want to open it up. So, Claudia, you mentioned, you all did, with some great detail about how you have used the skills gained in the comm studies major with various communities and people that you interact with as part of your job. I wonder if each of you could speak specifically about the point of applying and interviewing. How do you communicate your expertise, your background, those skills that you just described at length, Claudia, to the person who's in charge of saying yes or no, your application moves on to the next round? Why don't you start us again, Emily, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I took a really fabulous class towards the end of my time in comm studies with Dr. Sabbath. It was a professional communication class, and I don't know if she teaches it still, but she helped me a lot with my resume and cover letter, and I still use quite a bit of that formatting and the wording that she helped me with at that time. And so that class, if you haven't taken it and you have time to take one, I would highly recommend it. Another thing that I did when I was in that class for some extra credit is I did an informational interview with somebody at the city where I now work, and that was really great to kind of get your foot in the door. The city can be tough to get your foot in the door in, and so you have to have interpersonal connections a lot of times in order to find a spot there. And so I would highly recommend using your ability to pitch yourself in a genuine way, in a way that doesn't feel scripted. I think like a lot of applicants that they receive get relationships with the people that you want to work with. It doesn't matter if they're high up in the organization, it doesn't matter if they're gonna be working on a team alongside you and they're more of like a manager or a coordinator position. You have the skills from this department to represent yourself in a really genuine and easy to get along with way. You don't have to be an extrovert in order to do that. I'm definitely not an extrovert, but it is a skill that you can build to make good relationships with the people that you want to work with. So that would be my main tip for folks who are looking to interview and get a position, maybe at a job that can be tough to get your foot into, is just to find some time to sit down with somebody with no agenda and have a conversation with them about what makes them passionate about the work that they do, and what they would recommend to you as somebody who'd like to follow in their footsteps.
I think going into the application and job search process, being a communication studies major, and especially moving into those entry-level positions, is both a challenge and an asset. And I say that to say that I think a couple years into your career, it becomes much more of an asset. But when you're first starting out, it's not always the specific degree that a job application is looking for, because we're broad and multidisciplinary. So they might be looking for specifically a social work degree, or specifically a political science degree, or specifically something that probably fits within liberal arts, but may not necessarily say communication studies. So that's where relationships are really helpful for getting into that first stage of things, where you can explain what is the value of a communications degree in that way. My coworker though tells me that it's hard to hide quality, and I think that's what comms students have going for them, is that once you get that foot in the door, people will realize that you are an asset in what is in some ways sometimes considered soft skills in some ways, because you're going to be able to work well with a team, communicate well in reports, do things that make other people's lives easier and make people want to work with you, because you understand how to communicate and how to move through systems in that way. But that can be a little bit tricky at the offset. So I think with each one of us, there were different things, like, you know, your experience with organizing, something else that you need some experience to pair with it, and keep figuring out what's your cocktail of experience with the degree that you have that's going to propel you upward. And you need to be able to talk about some of those hard skills too, of I can use this software, I can produce this social media content, I can do some of those things that then pair with the sort of foundational skills that are going to make you a really valuable asset to an organization over the long term as well. I would say is being able to describe that mix.
This is such a great question. I'll start by saying that like communication students are such an attractive, right, like candidate in the workforce, right? Like, do not buy into like the social media slander against our major, right? I see it all the time. It's ridiculous, because when you look at any job posting, right, and you look at the preferred like characteristics and like responsibilities or skill sets, it is like word for word what you all are becoming experts in your time here at CSU, right? And so they want what you are in a variety of different areas of focus and fields, right? And I think to Kale's point, right, like finding what your passion is, finding out what you're interested in, you're already bringing in those soft skills that are incredibly like wanted in the workforce. When it comes to interviewing, again, keep your notes from Sabbath's class or whatever the name of that course is, because I have also found those to be incredibly relevant and helpful even now, like 4 years later. I was just talking about this last night, right, where I do use the template that I learned in that class for my cover letter every single time. I use that template for my resume every single time, right? I now think about the STAR model, right, when answering interview questions every single time. And so that class, one, is truly wonderful. But two, I would also say practice. So just as you prepare for class, just as you prepare for a test, just as you prepare for an exam, right, you want to become incredibly familiar with the material of that job and the responsibilities that it requires, right? So know what the job posting actually is. Do your research, right? Look at their website, look at their staff, read the bios, look at, you know, people who have filled that position before, right? Like ask those questions in the interview of, you know, a question that I'd like to ask in the interview phase is, what are some milestones over the past year that your team is proud of, right? Because then I get to see what this group prioritizes, right? Like what my work could look like and if that's aligning with me as well. Because the interview is a two-way communication format, right? You are also interviewing them to see if they are a good fit for you, right? So you are coming in, you know, eager and excited and have all these questions, but also remember that you have just as much autonomy in that space to decide where you want to go in your career and what you want to be, where you want your title to be, and like what skills you want to learn on the job as well, right? I'll also say this specifically for women, right, or femme-identifying folks, that when you're reading the job posting and looking at like the qualifications and like all the things that they want, do not sell yourself short, right? Women are far more likely to say no to themselves before even applying to a job than men. And don't do that, because there's never going to be a 100% perfect candidate for a job posting. People know that. I've been on interview panels multiple times in my work, right, since leaving CSU, and all the incredible applicants that we get, and some are truly remarkable, are never 100% qualified for the job, right? The team that is hiring is making those calculations to see what they want to do as far as like training you, right, and the time spent in like getting you accustomed to all the things that this role entails. So I would say, like, keep your confidence, right? If there's something in there that attracts you to the position and you're like, I know I can learn it when I get there, right? And that ability to be a fast learner, that ability to like be comfortable making mistakes and asking questions and being curious is gonna serve you well once you get that job.
Great, thank you all so much. So many great bits of advice that I've found myself saying versions of, whether it's apply, right? Don't sell yourself short. You're always going to be more competitive than you think you are. Build the relationships from early on with the places you might want to work. And know too that all three of these folks echoed some version of this. A lot of employers might not have a clear picture of you in their head when they're building the job call, right? It's up to you to sort of give them some of the language, some of the skills that aren't in the job call, some of the things that they might not know they're looking for in the next generation of folks applying. I wonder if the three of you could speak a little bit specifically about the workplace post-COVID. So many of our folks have gone through high school and part of their college experience doing sort of COVID-informed education. What does the workplace look like in a sort of post-COVID world, and what should students sort of prepare as they enter that COVID-E/post-COVID workplace?
I think the city of Fort Collins, maybe y'all can speak a little bit more to this, but city of Fort Collins may be a little bit of an outlier because they had already pretty well established mental health care systems for their employees and remote work options pre-COVID that have been bolstered since the pandemic. And so I found, just compared to the job that I had pre-COVID and the job that I have now, which are different jobs, but this is my experience, is that there's a lot more emphasis on taking time off when you need it and not forcing yourself to go to work when you've got a cough, for example. And and there's much more flexibility in order to do that. So you can, I work a 50% hybrid schedule, so I'm in the office 2.5 days a week, and that was my choice. I could go fully remote or I could go full in the office, which was a great option and super attractive for me when I was applying for the city. So take a look at where you work best. I know that I work best in an office. I get more work-life balance when I'm at home. You know, it's really nice to be able to get the kitchen clean on a Friday afternoon, so I don't have to do it on the weekends, and then I have my whole weekends available. And if that's something you're looking for, you should definitely look for that. And then I tend to, you know, put off my work for when I'm in the office, because I have like this weird feeling like I'm smarter in the office. So I'll be like, I'll let smart Emily deal with that later. So that's why I'm not fully remote. But yeah, the option to kind of choose was really fantastic, and I think more and more companies are still offering that. You know, I hear all the time all of these horror stories about people who were hired fully remote, and then their jobs were like switched on them, and they were like, we're gonna make you come into the office a couple days a week, and they live 100 miles away, and they're like, what are we gonna do? So I would just say, when you're looking for work, you know, figure out where you work best. Is it in office? Is it remote? Is it somewhere in between? And make sure that you get in writing that your position is going to be remote or hybrid or in office when you get hired. Because I am hearing these kind of things as companies try to move past the pandemic and figure out what were we doing from here. I think the thing that was really weird, and you might have experienced it here at school as well, but when your higher ups are facing a situation where they don't know what to do because we've never experienced this before, that's super, super uncomfortable, and it's gotten a little bit better, but there's still a lot of areas where people that we're trusting to take care of us are saying like, I've never seen this before, I don't know what work is gonna look like over the next few years. Just remember that the pandemic really highlighted for a lot of us that we need to put ourselves first. We are not just cogs in the machine. It doesn't matter how passionate you are about your work or how wonderful the organization that you work for is, you still are an individual with needs. And that was a huge thing to come out of the pandemic that I guess is one of the silver linings of a pretty awful situation. So just remember that, don't sell yourself to your first job. You don't have to anymore. That's not what people are expecting you to do, and if they are, then they're in the past.
So I think when I speak on this, I probably am most attuned to nonprofit work environments. So take that with a grain of salt, depending on where you're going. I've worked in more kind of traditional marketing environments as well in the past, but it's been a little while since I've done that. I would say, similar to Emily, I feel like an absolute anomaly in some ways. So as we're a nonprofit, we're a team of 10. We work across the state of Colorado. So in my role, I have a pretty high degree of travel, but I can work from home most of the time when I'm not traveling. But that is something that I think communication is really important with an employer, because it says on there for my job, it's a remote job, but it's a remote job with 50% travel kind of thing. So that's a little bit different than just thinking about it as a remote job. We also have an office environment that we can go to, and we go to probably once a month. And not many people actually use it at all. But then in addition to that, when the pandemic hit, it led for us a much larger sort of introspective of how our work culture was reflecting the world that we wanted to create. Because we're a nonprofit whose vision is creating a Colorado where everyone can thrive, kind of this definition of equity, we wanted to have equity internal to our organization as well. So in addition to kind of some of that like remote versus hybrid work, we've also been on a journey that I've seen trend some in nonprofits, not all of them by any stretch of the imagination, but restructuring our organization so that we actually don't follow a hierarchical organizational model. So we do a lot more consensus-based decision making as an organization and have different opportunities for people to grow and flex their skills and strengths within our org that don't follow the traditional upward ladder of an org chart. And that has meant that it's a totally different set of expectations for somebody coming into our org that we have to communicate through, because basically none of the old rules apply in some ways. So I don't know how much you're gonna encounter an org like us, because I think we're a little bit weird. But I have seen more of a trend towards that, or with other experiments in 4-day work weeks or unlimited PTO. Those are good things to ask about in interviews though, because sometimes unlimited PTO sounds great, but
what's PTO?
Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
Paid time off. So how much paid time off that you have. For a lot of orgs, you start at, I don't know, around 2 weeks, and it can grow with the more time that you're with an organization. But some orgs are moving towards unlimited PTO, and then you just take it off when you want to. But you want to make sure that there's a culture that actually supports you taking off PTO, versus it can be sort of panopticon-y in the negative side of that, where you basically are asked to self-regulate yourself in your PTO time off kind of thing. So those are good things to just ask questions about and communicate through to figure out, as there are these culture changes happening in workplaces, what does that look like in real life versus what it looks like on paper?
So I graduated in May of 2020, which means that I graduated into a workforce that was trying to figure out, right, how to work during a global health crisis and transition from a work culture in this country that was predominantly always, right, like in person, to now being online. And that was incredibly, right, like disorienting, because my entire college career, I only saw myself, right, envisioning myself in the future working in person 100% of the time, right? And to grapple with that as a new graduate was really weird, right? But I did have a job secured, right, at graduation, and have been working in a remote hybrid model for the past 4 years. And I think the biggest thing to like note about that is echoing, right, like doing a lot of self-reflection of what you want, right, in your schedule. And also recognizing that there are a lot of workplaces that are now trying to transition back into more in-person work and like expectations on like a weekly basis. And if that is something that you are interested into, right, like pay attention to that when you're seeking out the position. But also, right, I think the biggest takeaway that I had is that remote work created opportunities as like to communicate with people across borders, right, and across distances in a really efficient and practical way that I don't think was necessarily there beforehand. So in my work, our affiliate represents 4 states. It represents Colorado, New Mexico, Southern Nevada, and Wyoming, right? Before remote work was the custom, right? Those meetings were happening in silos, right? So it'd be the Colorado team only talking to Colorado staff, right? And it would be the New Mexico team only talking to the people who live in New Mexico. And now we can have thought partners across states, right? And it really helps us, especially in this moment, as we look at the landscape, the political landscape and the access landscape for abortion care in this country, to know and have those easy lines of communication that are more widely accepted and like appreciated than beforehand. So I think there's like the connection piece, right? And I think it was actually in Dr. Aoki's class where you talked a lot about how like we are gonna see a global shift into like more communication across wider distances, right, in regions. And I think that like that is a definite symptom, right, perhaps, right, of being in the remote workforce. So to do any harm in these communities. So also being mindful of like health factors and communities that haven't had the same resources or opportunities to equip themselves, right, with like vaccines, right, or masks, or have reliable health insurance or things like that. And so if it makes more sense for a community to meet with the community on a webinar, right, or in a Zoom room, then that's what we do. But a lot of those like relational organizing and being able to see people face to face is incredibly valuable and joyful, right? Speaking for me personally, to be able to like share space with you all, right? And you do get different things in the different formats, right? So when you are working with somebody and communicating with them and building a relationship online, that's going to look really different than the person that you are building a relationship with in person. There's going to be pros and cons there. Being able to like pull a link out of thin air and drop it in the chat is really convenient, and you can't always do that when you're talking to somebody over coffee.
Open it up to you folks. What questions do you have for our alum?
Yeah, I'll go first. What are some like general ways you all advocate for yourself in the workforce, in like your major or just the work that you do?
I think capacity is where I have to advocate the most. People will, like if you, I have found, right, that when I am able to like show up really well, then people will expect more of you, right? And that is both a compliment and also a greater commitment, in the sense, right? So being mindful of your own ability to produce quality work, right? And gain those experiences. I think some of the really great advice that like my mom gave me was, like you hear this thing where like this idiom, right? Like opportunity only knocks once. No, right? If you are good at what you do and you are diligent with your work and you commit yourself to trying to show up the best you can every single time, opportunity is going to knock again and again and again and again. And you get to say yes and you get to say no where it makes sense for you. And so I think carrying that confidence, right, that you don't have to have it all, you don't have to like saturate yourself with saying yes to this and yes to that, and I have to show up here and I have to do this and I have to do that to get ahead. Pace yourself, right? Remember that the quality of your work is what's most important, often, right? And being able to find the power in your no. Power in your no is also power in your yes, because when you know clearly what you are going to do and what your work plan is and what your priorities are, it makes it really easy to say no, right? No, that doesn't align with what I need to be focusing on. No, that's not in my priorities for this year, right? And right, you're all communication majors, so you know how to keep the door open so that people know that that no is a soft no, right? No for today, maybe yes next time. And like just staying mindful of your capacity. You don't want to burn out.
So I think the ability to advocate for yourself can be a really, really powerful tool, not just within your organization, but when you're working with others. And it's one of the ways that I've seen communication majors be able to navigate, once you're in the door, navigate systems in a different way, because you're able to communicate with people regardless of kind of how much power someone might have over you. When you're able to remember your core communication skills, you're able to talk with that person as another person and figure out ways to get your mutual needs met, which is another way of thinking about how to advocate for yourselves, is to think about what are somebody else's needs in a situation, what are my needs, what's the story they're telling, what's the story I'm telling, how can we create space for both of those stories to come together and talk to one another, versus if we think about that as a strictly advocating can feel like you're pushing against something in some ways, and there's an immovable force that you need to push against. And that, if you are able to reset the dynamics of that situation, even if you're in your own brain, of to say, what am I looking to gain out of this experience, this situation? How can I come to this person also recognizing what they need? You're much more likely to move in that situation, regardless of it, if that person's your boss or if that person's a partner out in the community in some way. And then there was one other piece around advocating for yourself. The one other piece that I'll say is just, I'm gonna just name a discomfort that I know I had initially when coming out of school, where my mental model of what it was gonna be like to have my first job didn't quite match up with what my first job actually was. Because school focuses so much on the skills of critical thinking, of how do I think through this situation differently, better, how do I improve things? And in the first job, I wasn't asked to do any of those things. I was asked to do what somebody was telling me to do, right? And it made me feel like, whoa, you're not taking advantage of all the things I can do for you. And what I didn't realize is that person had no reason to trust that I could do those things, and that doing the things that they were asking of me, I was going to learn different things that I hadn't learned in school. And so hitting that balance of being patient in that role of like, yeah, you don't want to get stuck making copies forever, right? But make copies to build trust until you get to that next point.
Both of these were fantastic answers. I just want to add, one thing that helps me is just writing things down about myself. If any of you guys play like D&D, you create these character sheets for your character, and maybe if that gets you really excited, do one for yourself. That would be super cool. And I think relating back to what Kale said right at the beginning about how the communication studies degree can be a little bit ethereal and hard to define. Define what you are learning in as many words as you can. And it doesn't really matter if you think that that's valuable to a job or not. Just write it down, and that's gonna make it so much easier to then come to an interview and say, yeah, I can respond to that question because I already wrote this down. I don't have to keep it in my mind somewhere. Or then when you get the job and you're faced with some sort of request from your boss, or maybe you want to take on a new responsibility, you can say like, yeah, I've got the skills. I wrote them down 2 years ago when I graduated college. Because they can be really easy to forget. But if you've got yourself lined out on a piece of paper, it's so much easier to advocate for yourself.
My name is Emily. I just had a question. Kale, you touched on it very briefly, but if you're kind of trying to figure out what you want your job to be, like right after you graduate, you might be like bouncing around from job to job. How do you frame that in an interview where it's not like you're being flaky, just moving to different jobs, and how you're kind of trying to find what's the right fit? How do you kind of frame that in an interview, or kind of avoid some of those maybe red flags that an employer might interpret that as?
Something that was really important that I did my senior year was to come up with a couple adjectives that kind of described my dream job. And for me, it was creative problem solving. I had to have some sort of aspect of creative problem solving. It was relational, so I was working with people and building relationships with them. And it also needed to inspire me. And I realized that I needed to do something that I felt was going to impact the world on a larger scale than just myself. So those are the three things that I was looking for when I was looking for work. And those can apply to a lot of different jobs. I settled with government work. It doesn't have to be government work. It can be nonprofits. You can find all these things in private companies as well. And so when I went into my first job out of graduation, which I hated, was awful, and I think that's a common experience, I was still able to look at it like, okay, it ticked off at least one of these boxes. It was very relational. I was a customer service person. And the mission of the organization, the Larimer Humane Society, where I worked with, also inspired me. So I was able to kind of tick those boxes. but it didn't get at this creative problem solving aspect. So when I moved on, I was able to then tell people in interviews, like, yeah, this job, didn't quite meet what I was looking for, and that's the reason that I left. I didn't need to bring up the fact that, like, managerial stuff was awful, and I just felt terrible every day that I worked there. Because I was able to kind of frame it as in, like, this was my first stepping stone, and it was almost perfect, but it wasn't quite perfect. And then tell the interviewer what in the job application you saw could hit those points. Like, I saw that this job application requires me to solve problems frequently. So I'm really excited about this job for that reason. And that helps them understand, what you're looking for in the job, why you would be a good fit, why you would be a passionate employee, as well as why you're leaving the job that you're currently in. And I think from what I've seen, it's no longer really as much of a red flag to kind of hop around some jobs when you first graduate. So if you're still looking for that right fit, don't feel like you have to be loyal to an employer who doesn't care about you or is causing you distress. A job that is 40 hours a week but absolutely destroys you mentally is going to cause you so much more exhaustion and strain on your bandwidth than a job that's 50 hours a week that you actually enjoy. So don't look at it by the numbers, look at it by, these are the things I want out of a job. It can be 3 things, it can be 2 things, it can be 1 big thing. If it's not hitting that, then express yourself and say it's not what I wanted. The next opportunity, I'm hoping to get closer.
I wouldn't stress too much, right, about fearing that employers are going to look at that as a red flag. I think that, especially as new graduates, employers are going to have a lot of grace and understanding, right, that you're new, right, and that you're trying to figure things out and test the waters, right, to see what you're interested in. And I think also, like, making sure that in the interview, right, if that is brought up, being able to talk about, like, your collective experience instead of, like, becoming too granular. It's like, when I was at this job, I did this, or this is how I felt when I was at this job. You can say, my overall, right, like, experience facing this or encountering this in the workplace, right, my approach has been X, Y, Z, right? And so kind of doing, like, a cumulative, right, like, view and presentation of your work and your career thus far. I also think, right, like, when you get to a point on your resume, right, where you're, like, trying to debate what jobs and how to rank them and in order and stuff like that, you don't have to put all your jobs on there, right? Sometimes it pays off to be selective and being like, I want to highlight this position at this organization and I want to highlight this position at this organization. I don't really need to tell people that I did childcare, right, for 4 years when I was in college, And so being able to, like, accurately communicate what you took away from those positions, I think is most valuable, right? And if you've gotten a lot of collective experience working at 4 different jobs, right, you can talk about, right, like, how you approach and, like, grew in each of those positions in a type of like overview sensibility.
And then I think when you go into the interview process, there's a couple of questions that I think there's this one around, can you explain a little bit about how you got to this point, explain, any gaps in career, things like that. And then the other one that comes up is, can you describe a situation that you had conflict with somebody and how you navigated that one is another common one. And with both of those, sometimes I hear people not have enough of an answer to it where they've prepared for it in advance, and they end up telling their experience, which is an honest answer, but you want to think about what is the employer wanting to learn from that question. So yes, they want to know, are you going to hop jobs all the time? That is something that they want to know. So you can say, I realized that this wasn't the fit for me, and so I started actively pursuing things that really would align with my interests, so that I could see myself in a long-term career with. You're communicating there that I see a long-term career with you, right? This is the actual fit of what I want there. Same thing with the conflict question. Don't tell us all the details of the conflict. That's not actually what they want to know at all. They want to know how you dealt with it, right? So the emphasis on how you deal with changing jobs or with difficult managers. Everybody's going to have those. Nobody's going to be a candidate who comes clean slate, they've had only good experiences and now suddenly they're applying for a new job, right? It's about what you make out of them that you want to communicate.
You mentioned soft no's. Could you elaborate a little more on that, or like any advice you have maybe for how to handle that?
Yeah, I even think about, I think like a very recent example, right, is that we're trying to build some relationships in like the southern part of Colorado, and I was invited to go participate in a panel, right, this past weekend, and while I was like, oh, I could like really see the value in like building up this relationship and having like presence down there, it doesn't, right, like work out with my schedule, and so being able to like say no, but also letting them know, right, like that you really understand like the value of this ask and you want to be able to like show up in the future and to like, some people need to hear explicitly that they can ask again, right, and that you won't like continue to say no all the time, right. I think that that's like the difference between like a hard no where it's like nope, we want nothing to do with this, right, like I have no interest in this whatsoever, and then there's a soft no where it's like it doesn't work this time, but please, right, like think of me in the future, and don't be afraid to reach out again. I think also, right, like I like to couple mine with kind of redirecting and sharing resources. So while I wasn't able to go to that panel, I was letting them know we have these two folks down in Colorado Springs, right, who you should reach out to, right? And so being able to couple that with like not shutting down the ask completely, but like orienting folks to get what they need to get in general if it can't come from you.
Other questions from you folks? Yeah, Dr.
Thank you. The frame of our capstone course is constituting community, communication, culture, and context. And you're all speaking to variations and specificities of all that. But if I can ask, so some of the teams that will be presenting at the very end of the semester are teams on constituting community, online, virtually, through things like the relational organizational aspects, constituting community in organizations. And I'm hearing you all say the organizations might be defined very differently these days. Constituting community in geographical regional spaces, knowing your audience, constituting community in civic and sort of community engagement in smaller communities. So a lot of iterations that we're talking about through diversity variables of indigenous communities and marginalized, minoritized communities. Do any of those topics give you some room to give a response to that connection about what you've been learning about constituting, constructing a sense of community as you've shifted from your life here on campus to your careers and your outside communities as well?
I can start on this one. I feel like
And
this.
thank you for being here. Sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you for being here.
This has so many applications to both my work, internal to my organization, and external. So I think when I think of constituting communities in a virtual environment, if you are in a remote work environment, that's one of the ways that I think that you should watch for sort of invisible dynamics in some ways. So for instance, we use Slack as a communication channel at my org, or you might use Teams or things like that, right? I can tell with different teammates, different folks will engage in different styles of communication with me, but we can't see each other's different styles of communication. So I will have some folks who will video call me to just do a quick question. That would be much more like, this is gonna be such an outdated term, it already is, but like water cooler talk doesn't exist in the same way. It's a quick Slack huddle, right? But if I'm somebody who is, maybe it's my first job, I'm in Slack, and I think, oh my God, I can't just reach out to my boss to Slack her, how was your weekend or something. That would be like a waste of work time or something like that. But those are absolutely relational elements that you have to do to constitute that virtual work environment. So like for us, we have little huddles that we do for 30 minutes every other day that are totally optional, but that are to constitute that community for us so that people can get to know each other and be people outside of just what is our task-oriented objective for whatever meeting this is. And so being able to name what you need or initiate that can be an important part of navigating that virtual community in a work environment. And then the work that I do, so one of our big bodies of work is that we partner with the Colorado Health Foundation. They've picked 8 communities throughout the state that they want to do locally focused grants in. So a lot of funders will say, okay, we want to find programs that serve early childhood ages 0 to 7. And we're gonna give out money related to early child care centers or programs in different ways. This is a different approach that the Health Foundation says, we wanna just go to communities, find out what the issues are, and then fund those opportunities. So as a contractor where we work with the Health Foundation, we go to communities, we build relationships, we say, you know, what health issues are you having? You know, is it things that we would think of like chronic illness, or is it transportation that makes it hard to get to the doctor and things like that? Every day in that work, we have to ask ourselves, who are we listening to? Who is community in this sense? As we're moving away from a more structured approach that says people come to us, apply for money, and then they get money, we're doing a fundamentally different approach to think about who community is and how we engage and interact with them. And it constantly forces us to ask the question, well, who counts as community? What is the community's voice when we say, what are the health challenges? Do we think of community as those folks who are most impacted by health disparities? Or do we think of it from the sort of majority rules? Those are all different ways of thinking about how to listen to community voice that are choices we make in the sort of strategy of our work every day, and require that we talk about that and talk about how we're constituting community there.
It sounds like a fantastic capstone. Community is probably going to be one of the most important things when you're looking back at your life, I think, at the end of it. And maybe it shows up, as Dr. Aoki said, maybe it shows up as the interpersonal relationships that you have with the people that you're working with, the people that you don't work with but are friends with, your family, etc. It also may show up as a goal that you're trying to achieve in your work. At the City of Fort Collins, in my department, Neighborhood Services, we do a ton of work around community. That's kind of our entire goal and mission, is to increase the community in Fort Collins, because we've found that it can be so vital to these really important outcomes. For example, if people are able to get the phone numbers of at least 5 of their neighbors, they're more likely to get through a natural disaster without having any negative impacts. Like, that's a small thing and it makes such a big impact. We also talk a lot about like third spaces, places where people can be together without being asked to spend money or to perform in some sort of way. So you can think about like libraries, a place where you can go and there are other people there, and it helps you build community without having to spend money. Like, can you imagine getting to go to a restaurant and be with your friends and have that experience of, you know, getting to hang out socially without having to spend money on food? And it makes a huge impact on the way that we health of our communities, the way that we can solve our problems together, just by being together and by knowing each other. Even at a basic level, the kind of word acquaintance isn't really used so much anymore. And I think that's another pandemic thing, is we just don't have these kind of extra people that we know but we don't really know, but they're actually really vital in your life when you look across your lifespan and what are the things that I'm trying to achieve and who am I going to reach out to try to achieve these things. So you personally, I feel like are going to struggle and should have a focus on building a community for yourself. And then you may also focus in your work on building community for others. I really enjoy that work personally. It's not necessarily something that you have to do with a communication degree, but it's a hugely rewarding place to be. And I'm hoping that through this capstone, you kind of get an idea of maybe if you want to do that kind of work. If you do, just know that you are the person who's keeping society together because it's something that we lost it before the pandemic a little bit, but the pandemic really showed where we were missing it.
I think looking at community, right, and as like you prepare to graduate and go into your careers, it's important to keep in mind that you will always belong to a community and cater to one, right, across different areas of focus, whether and like disciplines in the workforce. And I like to keep in mind with my role, right, that I am doing community-centered work, right, but there is a history of this role that predates me, and there will be a legacy that goes on without me in this position, right? And so trying to have that professional understanding of what my sphere of control is and what I contribute to a community culture, right, is really grounding in looking at sustainable movement building, especially when you are doing, right, like long-term visioning, right, like those, trying to address those wicked problems, and knowing that you show up in this time period, right, and how can you ensure that when you are gone, the community and the work and the labor that you've invested will outlive your time in this role.
What other questions do you folks have for our alum?
We'll go again.
You go, John.
Okay. Well, I was just gonna ask a pretty practical question. What are some ways you all looked to apply to jobs in general as a communication major?
I used Indeed a lot. The statistic that I heard when I was applying for jobs with Indeed a whole bunch, which was pre-pandemic and is probably different now, but it was for every 10 jobs you apply, you'll get maybe one response. And that's pretty dismal, and it can be very frustrating. And I also found that in the work that we do, this kind of advocacy work, those jobs aren't posted a whole bunch on Indeed. But it was like quantity over quality at that spot. There is, oh my gosh, what is it called? I think there is a specific job board for people who are looking to go into,
Think of an idealist.
Idealist, yeah, it's a bit smaller, but it's gonna be a little bit more tailored. And then I also had a little bit more success in joining some groups. They can be like working groups, professionals groups, like the Emerging Leaders in Government job list is pretty good, and it costs you a little bit of money, so if you are able to get a job and they're able to pay for that membership, that's really helpful. But if you're looking for a job, you may have to pay for it yourself, but they have pretty decent job boards. And then the job that I have now is honestly, I just got it because I knew the right person, and that's really hard to teach somebody to do. But I do think as communication studies majors, you have that ability to find the right person and know them. My current boss was in the same master's program as I was, and that's how I was able to get this job. So that's kind of disheartening, but I think it's also heartening in a certain way. Like, you can find the right person, connect with them, and a lot of things can come out of that.
I definitely like using LinkedIn. I think that caters well, one, because the algorithm is pretty effective when you start listing out and filling in, right, like your profile. It'll start recommending jobs that you would be a good candidate for, right? Like, it's collecting a lot of data. So it's really interesting to kind of like scroll through and see, okay, right, like if I have this background and this, communication education, and I'm interested in these things, right, like what will it show me that I would be a competitive candidate in? I think having a diverse like array of job opportunities coming to you, right, like communication ways of what that's doing. So whether you're using like the job search apps, whether you're getting on like a listserv, right, for a community group. I see a lot of those on big listserv in Denver that's constantly posting newsletters that have people reaching out and like plugging in job openings and like things like that. The relational networking is huge. And I also want to like note really quickly, because this is something that took me a long time to learn, because I made an assumption coming out of right, like undergraduate, that your mentor will be your supervisor, and that is not always the case, right? Your supervisor and your manager will not always serve as your mentor, and so you may have to go out and find mentors, right, outside of your organization, in a different department, right? Do peer-to-peer mentorship, things like that. But you want to make sure that you have people who are talking you up and thinking about you, right, in the rooms that you're not in, so that when they hear about a job opportunity, they think of you, and they can go say, right, like, you definitely need to go talk to so-and-so, right? Or they're coming to you and they'll be like, I heard about this job opportunity, right? The application closes in 2 weeks. You want to get in on that, and things like that. So I think that that's something really important to know, right? Like, I found having mentors was a lot easier when I was an undergraduate, right? Like, because oftentimes your advisor, right? Or they're the professor that you like the most, or, like, they're your supervisor at your student job. And it comes kind of like, there's like a natural little ecosystem that really cultivates good mentorship and mentee relationships on this campus, I found. And coming into the workforce, I totally thought my supervisor was going to be that for me, and respectfully, he's not, right? And so I have had to put a lot of effort into making sure that I'm setting up those one-on-ones with people that I want to mentor me, right? And you have to make that hard ask. You're like, I really admire you, and I'd like to start learning from you. Can we talk more about how you handle this at this point in your career, or things of that nature? And that serves you well, right?
I think they might have gotten bought out by somebody else, but I used Andrew Hudson's job list too, that had good Colorado-based jobs, that had also a section that was specific to entry level, which was helpful too. And then for the relational piece of like, how do you get the right connections to get those jobs? I'll speak to just myself as an introvert, hated that part of the process, still probably does. And so I had to figure out different tricks for myself. So like, I do better, like, I'm not gonna go to a Chamber of Commerce meet and greet type of thing and be able to just like find a job. I just know that about myself. But I can go to a conference where I can go to sessions that I'm interested in, and then I can talk to people about the things that I'm interested in, and sound a lot more cool than when I just try and like, I'm really bad at the like exits and hellos, I guess, of the like, how do I get in and get out with the phone number type of thing. Whereas if I can just focus on talking about things that I care about, I do much better. So I just have to know that about myself, and then figure out the right space to do that.
Your professors have a lot of connections too. They're all people who are really, really ingrained in this community. So especially if you want to stay in Fort Collins after graduation, get to know your professors. They may already have memberships to these organizations. that will have job postings, and if they know you well, they may think of you when they see it, or they may know somebody who knows somebody. So highly recommend getting to know your professors really well.
Time for one final question. I have one. Izzy, did you have?
Oh, I was just gonna kind of ask the same thing.
Okay.
So.
Can I ask the like cliche ending question? What is one bit of advice that you would have wanted to hear when you were sitting in this position several years ago as a graduating senior? Or what can you offer from your position now to these folks? One bit of advice.
Just one.
I think something like a piece of advice that I'd offer that I wish somebody had told me, and that I find be useful, right, is that one, don't sell yourself short when you are in your first job out of graduating, right? You have a lot to offer and people hired you for a reason. Be courageous in bringing your talents and your expertise to the table, because one, that will show you where your strengths are, and it'll also show you where your areas of growth are. You have to be vulnerable in that step. I think the second piece that goes along with that is keep a learning mentality. You all have spent the past however many years learning how to be good students, right? Take that with you into your profession, and continue trying to find different ways to flex your skills, grow them, look at new training opportunities, and continue, if you want to be in the place that you're at, right, continue thinking about how you can be the best fit candidate every single year, right?
Do you have one on something?
I think I've already said a few things that I've learned kind of that have helped me, you know, writing things down, defining the 3 things that you want out of your job. And it all kind of relates back to just knowing yourself. Y'all are coming into a place in your life where things are gonna change, and you may not be the same person at first glance in 5 years as you were today. But as long as you know yourself and you know the values that you really hold dear, what's really important to you, strengths and weaknesses, not only will answering interview questions become a lot easier because you already know a lot of the answers to the questions that they're gonna ask, but you also know which jobs are gonna fit you a lot better, as well as what roles and tasks within those jobs you might enjoy, what roles and tasks you might not enjoy. I found out over the last few years, kind of slowly dawning on me, that I'm not really a detail-oriented person. And I always wanted to be a detail-oriented person because they always got so much praise and they were always good at stuff. And so I pushed myself to like be really detail-oriented. But when I do that, usually the quality of my work goes down and I get exhausted much easier. And so finding that out about myself has been really helpful for me, not even moving between jobs, but staying within the job that I have and kind of altering the way that I go after my work. And I kind of wish that I had known that earlier as well, because I put myself in a lot of positions where I was promising to work in a detail-oriented way when I would much rather work in like a big picture kind of process way. That's more comfortable for me, and I wish that I had known that about myself. It's hard to kind of introspect, especially when you have like lower work experience. You kind of learn these things as you go on, but you probably have enough reflection on your schoolwork, like what did I like about my schoolwork, what did I not like about my schoolwork. If it's really like exciting big picture stuff that you enjoyed, then you may not be a detail-oriented person, and you should look at jobs that allow you to manage people and create processes, because that's going to be much more enjoyable for you. So that's just one example, but there's so many things to know about yourself that would be so important to kind of figure out at this stage in life.
I think be patient with yourself. There's a lot of pressure at this point to have it totally figured out, have the really promising first job out of college, and it's gonna come with time. And so with that, I just say there's lots of people who are going to be asking you, what's your plan? And I would use that as an opportunity to ask other people about, these same questions. What would you do at my age? What connections do you think I should be making? Because then they'll help make you make those connections for you. So turn those questions back every time you get that what's next for you kind of thing, and get them to help you.
Thank you folks so much for joining us.